Hey people, I'm doing some work on this C30 today, and I was thinking it would be a good time to finally get around to making the video I've been wanting to make on a in-depth look into all-wheel drive swapping your Volvo C30. So if you have a Volvo C30, you can use the all-wheel drive system out of either a V50 or an S40 and convert your C30 from front-wheel drive to all-wheel drive. There are some advantages and disadvantages, which I'll mention in the future, but for the most part, you do get power to all four wheels, which means with the open diffs, which are standard in the front and rear, means you'll pretty much always have two wheels spinning if you end up getting stuck. So there's, like I said, there's more specifics to that, which I'll cover later down the road, and my attempts to fight that, the main drawbacks of it, but we'll get there when we get there. So in my opinion, this can really be done in 3 steps. Step 1 is the front end, so I'll be covering that today. Step 2 is the rear end, so swapping the rear subframe and fuel tank and fuel filler neck. Cover that later. And then step 3 is hooking everything up. I've got my drive shaft out at the moment because I had to change the CV boots, but I'm also going to be replacing the front subframe at some point with the one with all-wheel drive spacers on it so that everything lines up properly. But for today, we're just going to focus on the front end. It'll mostly be split into 2 parts: everything you need to do on the top side of the engine bay and everything you need to do on the bottom side of the engine bay. I don't actually need to take this out today, but I will remove part of this so visually it's easy to see what's going on. So I'm going to get this pipe removed. Probably not the filter. Actually, no, we're going to be replacing the filter. And I'll film again once I've got that removed and there's better vision on what needs to happen on the top end of the engine bay. So, all right, and I'm back here. I got my filter removed, got the pipe pulled out of the way for the moment. So you're going to end up needing to pull the transmission. So you're going to need to fully remove the factory airbox that comes out of these mounts here, here, and here. I think there's also a point down here, my light down here. You see, let's see if I can't point at it. So this right here, I believe it also mounts into. But yeah, you'll need to lift that out, and that comes forward, so towards the front, and then up is the best way to get that out. I've got this pod filter in here. I've had it in here for years. Not here to debate intakes, but it's worked for me. But yeah, so you're going to need to remove this. There's a coolant crossover pipe, or rather the upper radiator hose, which is, let me see if I can't get this nicely, which is this right here, which you need to remove. So you will have to ultimately drain the coolant. I highly recommend getting the car up on jack stands once you get the intake piping removed. Additionally, I'm not doing this because this is only for a couple moments, but you're going to want to put something here to prevent anything from falling down into the turbo itself. So additionally, you're going to want to remove the battery and the engine mount, or at least get down to the engine mount, so that you've got a way to loosen that at the very least, if not fully remove it when you drop the transmission. Additionally, you're going to need to pull the starter. So that's just 2 bolts. Oops. 2 bolts on there. You can see the back side of one of them, and then there's one on the other side of the starter, which you can reach from either underneath the car or get your fingers through with a wrench to pull that out. It is on dowels, and I recommend a dead blow hammer to fully remove it. Okay, final thing really on the top side is the heater core hoses. They get very brittle, and specifically at these points here, so it can actually crack and come off. This is something which is fairly well documented. I highly recommend Mike Halleck's video. My ideas were taken for a brass male-to-male fitting to replace them. I haven't done that just because these are new, relatively speaking, within the past 3 years, so I haven't had a need to do that, but likely at some point I will be replacing them with a male-to-male brass fitting to prevent that from breaking. But when you're pulling transmission, the engine itself may move up and down, and these hoses, while they do have give on them, this is the weak point in the hose. So you can actually undo this clip, and let's see if I can't get this with one hand, but basically you remove this outer clip and it releases these from the firewall, and that allows you a lot greater range of freedom for where the engine is essentially able to go up and down. Let me see. Oh, and obviously when you remove the transmission, you will need to remove the shift linkage. And there is trying to see if I can't find it, but there is one connector down there that you will need to remove, which is just I believe it's the gear sensor, so it tells the car if it's in gear or not. So, but yeah, that's about it. Automatics, it will be different. There's obviously different ways that's connected, but I've only worked on manual cars, so yeah. With that said, that's about it for up top. I'm gonna put stuff back together for a bit, finish what I was doing up here, and then I'll get the car up and we'll go underneath to take a look at what needs to be done down there. Alright, so that might have been loud, but got the car up on jack stands. Highly recommend getting heavier jack stands than you will ever need. This car weighs a little bit over 3,000 pounds, like 3,200 pounds, so 3 tons is way more than these jacks will ever need to handle. But that aside, you'll need to, in each side, let me get zoomed out here, I don't know why. Okay. In each side, you will need to do one of two things with the control arms. You'll need to either pull the ball joint, pull it off the subframe. I highly recommend pulling it off the subframe, because when you pull it off the ball joint, there's a good chance that you'll rip that joint. And then you'll just need to replace the entire control arm because the ball joints are not serviceable. All right, and on each side, tie rod ends, sway bar end links. And then I'm on the driver's side here for a reason. You're actually going to pull the cowl, or the protector wheel liner, out so that you have a little bit more access room, because you can see right there, peeking through is the transmission, and there's a couple of bolts up underneath which you will need to pull. Additionally, where the subframe mounts, let's see if I can't get light up on it. Subframe mounts right here. You have a hole in the control arm right here, so you can get a socket with an extension down to here so you can put a breaker bar on it. Now, if you already have the subframe pulled, you likely won't need to use an extension, but if you are doing this on a lift, you can do that to drop it without having to pull the control arms off of the subframe. Like I said before, I highly recommend pulling this control arms off of the subframe. It makes the job much easier on each side. It's just the bolt in the front, 2 on the bushing in the back, and then you get a hammer out and start nudging it off, and it typically comes right off. That's my way of doing it. However, some people might insist that you need to pull the the ball joint to get the control arm off properly. It really doesn't matter how you do it, just as long as it comes off. And if you have replacement control arms already, then you can just fully remove it. Wheel liner comes off, just some Torxes all around. These might be mismatched, like you see here. This one is different from this one. And I got the same thing going down here. That's just out of my laziness, out of the many times these have come off. All right, and then you can actually sort of see it here. You will also need to undo the steering rack bolt. This one you can actually access from above if you pull the battery box. You can actually get, I call it a leaning tower of power, which is a bunch of extensions, and get that out and sort of see it here. I don't think I've got a way to indicate where it is, but it's this bolt right in there you have to get out. Additionally, I highly recommend, well, there's the light. I highly recommend, I'll just cut that. I highly recommend, in addition to the stuff out here, removing the steering column from the steering rack. I'll just get it centered, pull the bolt. It's just a 10mm bolt into a clamp, essentially, on the column, and then I just leave it in the driver's side footwell so that it's always there, because I believe it is a specific length to function properly. And then just don't move the steering wheel. You can lock it in place however you want to, but if you're just yourself, I highly recommend just leaving it there. And yeah, actually I do have a spare subframe, so I'm gonna go walk over there and give a better description of what comes off of the subframe and how to get them out. So, all right, so this is a all-wheel drive subframe. The frame itself, the metal is the same aside from the, I believe it's the sway bar mounts, steering rack mount bolts are the same place, but it has these spacers on it. So I'm actually gonna get this, actually no, we'll cover the top side of this and then cover the bottom. So on the top side, so this is for the control arm. This is where it mounts its 215s, and that's where they end up going. The sway bar goes here, I believe, and that's two 13mm bolts. And these can be a pain because they have to go in, or they want to go in a specific order, and you need to torque them down individually. And then of course there's the torque mount up there. This is the front bolt that I was explaining before. This is the rear one. This one is like a 22 or a 23mm bolt. This is a hefty guy. I highly recommend getting a breaker bar on it, and it's held in with a plate as well, which has two 10mm or 13mm on it, I think. Yeah, I'll get this flipped over so there's a little bit better of an idea of what that looks like in good lighting, and then I'll go under the car so you can see what it looks like when it's actually installed. All right, so we're on the back side now. I know the paint's not the best, but I just painted it blue so that if anything does start corroding, or when I'm racing something makes an impact on it, I have better vision over it. But you can see here where things go. This is the control arm bolts. This is the back side of the steering mount or steering rack. This is the 21 or 22, whatever it is. And yeah, I think this is about it. Oh, and of course there's the torque mount. So yeah, let's get under the car, and it'll be a little bit more difficult to see exactly what's going on, but we'll be able to follow from there. And one last thing before we go under the car, you're going to want to remove the axle bolts right here. It's either a 13 or a 15. I can usually get them off with my impact gun. However, if you don't have that, I recommend either doing it while the car is on the ground, pulling the center caps out using a breaker bar, or having someone press on the brakes. If you're by yourself, just try and get the brake pedal pushed down as far as you can, and then go from there. unfortunately, it's kind of hard to do it by yourself if you don't have an impact gun. So, with that said, let's get into the car. Alright, so this is what mine looks like. It's a little bit oily. I've got the seal for the angle gear is leaking, which is why I don't actually have the transfer case in right now, or the drive shaft in, because don't know if I'll be doing it today, but I am going to be attempting to pull the angle gear and replace it. There we got the torque mount and the torque arm. The transfer is the front wheel drive torque arm. The all-wheel drive has a different shape due to it resting lower because the spacers in the front end. But here we can see on this side the control arm bolts here, here, and here, as well as the large bolt on the back and the bracket, the steering rack here and here. If you got everything disconnected and you start dropping the subframe, you can get the steering rack out after the subframe has been dropped. It might be easier to access that. I know for a fact with these subframe bolts, it's easier to access with the subframe essentially suspended. I recommend using a jack right about here if you can, and just lowering it slowly and keeping an eye on what drops. Additionally, you're going to want to pull the charge pipe, and yeah, also I gotta shift here, but the axle, I can find it here. Okay, so get you up here. Oh god, this is terrible. So the axle goes onto this race right here. This is just a pair of 10mm bolts that you pull the cap off, and then the passenger side axle can come out as soon as it's disconnected from the hub. And the knuckle is swinging freely, either from the subframe or the control arm being removed, or the ball joint being removed. Yeah. This gives a better image. You can see I did notch the control arm previously. This will focus. Focus. Okay, well, we're not having luck today. But I did try and get it out previously with a regular slide hammer and had no luck. And now I have a blind bearing puller, which should assist. So on the passenger side, to get to get this bolt out, obviously it'll come in contact with the power steering lines. What you're going to do is pull these two bolts. There's two bolts. I don't know if I'll be able to show. Okay, there's the upper one. Pull these two. I believe they're 10 or 13s. I think they're 13s. So that these power steering lines can come out of the way. There's enough give to where they will drop out on the back and allow you to push this through. Alternatively, you can just lower the subframe enough to where you can get this off. This bolt can be a pain to get out and a pain to get back in. It is somewhat self-guiding going back in, but coming out, it can be immensely difficult to get this out. So, all right, I'm going to go over the driver's side now, because there's a upper bracket to the transmission, which is visible from under the car. Alright, so back over here on the driver's side. Try to get this nicely here. But there's a bracket with 4 bolts. I think they're 15mm bolts, if memory serves correct, that are up there. That bracket, I believe you do need to transfer it over from the all-wheel drive or the manual transmission over to the all-wheel drive transmission, or if your car has if the donor car for the transmission, if it has the old style driver's side mount, you'll need to transfer over the new style from the front wheel drive transmission over to the all wheel drive transmission so that it mounts properly. So yeah, in terms of the transmission coming out, there's bolts that hold it to the engine, which go around the bell housing here, and there's like 4 or 5 on the top and 2 or 3 in the back. So obviously you want to get the charge pipe out of the way. And then I used a hydraulic table because I happen to have a small one, or at least have access to a small one at the time when I did the conversion. However, you can use a pair of jacks and a plank of wood or multiple planks of wood to drop this out of the way. If you actually follow Pelican Parts Guide to dropping the transmission, that is how they drop the transmission. So yeah, for the transfer case, I'm actually going to go over to that because I have that out of the car right now, and I'll walk through how that gets removed. Because before you pull the transmission, you have to, or at least on the all-wheel drive donor car, you have to remove the transfer case. So I'll go over to that right now. All right, so this is the transfer case. I've got the heat shield off of it at the moment, but this just lived on my floor for several months now. So it would be connected at the back here to the prop shaft, and of course this is where the axle will come out the other side to go to the passenger side wheel, and this is where it mounts to the transmission. When it's in the car, this will be mounted like this. So you'll note there's some points on here, note right there and there, and right here where it looks like it goes. That is in fact exactly where it goes, and this just helps prevent the transmission or the transfer case from overheating from the exhaust, because it does pass right over this. I do not recommend removing this and then installing it. This one I actually need to repair a little bit here. It's going to get it welded back together so that I can continue to use this, because that will greatly prevent issues with the gear oil in here getting cooked by the exhaust. See the Ford Explorer transfer case issues, because they do not have a heat shield like this that is as effective at protecting the transfer case. All right, the transfer case itself is held on, I believe, with 5 or 6 bolts here, 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 and then here and here. Note how this one has 2 holes on it. It will line up with one on the transmission, and yeah, do your best to note which bolt goes where in terms of length. They do have specific lengths for each of them. However, I think for the transfer case, it's all the same length bolt. For the transmission, it is different lengths. So yeah, like I said, the donor car, this needs to come off first, whereas with the front wheel drive car, the transmission can just be pulled without this. Additionally, well, this doesn't need to be done until you do the rear end, but when you do the rear end, you will need to pull the exhaust and replace it with either an aftermarket downpipe that fits all-wheel drive cars, such as the Elevate all-wheel drive downpipe, or just the factory downpipe, which is what I'm currently running. So yeah, it is pretty straightforward at the end of the day. You just everything unbolts and then bolts back in, and the same order in which it came out. It's just a matter of the tools you have. I will also include a list of the tools needed for this, at bare minimum the hand tools, as well as the recommended power tools or specialty tools for doing the job. So, yeah, that's about it for step one. This part, you don't need to do anything else to get the car to move again. You can pull the transmission, replace it with the all-wheel drive transmission, and once everything's bolted back up and buttoned back together, the car will still move without issue. When you do the rear end, a similar thing, but when you do the rear, you, like I said, you have to replace the not the transfer case, but the exhaust with one that is for a all-wheel drive, as well as the exhaust itself is vastly different from the catback. Really from the turbo back, but from the catback, you will need to at least do something different there, because I believe the front-wheel drive downpipe can be modified slightly to fit the all-wheel drive cars. But the rear end is completely different in the layout because the gas tank is different. So with that, I'll likely leave this here. I'll film anything in addition that comes up. But yeah, that's it for part one. Stay tuned for part two when I get the car up in the air, and potentially part three when I get the drive shaft and transfer case back in. So, yeah.